Hello, welcome to Endoor Model Railway. In the approach to Christmas, I realised it had been almost a year since I last progressed any of the terrain on the layout. In fact, there was actually slightly less terrain in place because I ended up removing a bit to fix the point motor for points number 9. The lack of progress was mostly because I've been more interested in other aspects of the railway, such as animating a signal and making use of microcontrollers for point control. But it's also largely because I haven't had great success with landscaping so far, so wasn't enthusiastic about doing more. However, the lack of anything scenic had gone on long enough to motivate me to making some kind of progress, regardless of how well it went or whether or not I enjoyed doing it. Endoor is, after all, supposedly my just get something done railway, a step on the way to a bigger and better N-gauge model railway at some point. I decided to tackle the middle mound first, and started by trimming back the top of the existing terrain to make space for the lid to sit flat on the inner frame. The lid needs to be removable for access to the electronics inside the mound. The electronics are on top of the door because this used to be a portable railway that rested on my dining table when in use. They've stayed there because underneath the railway in its new permanent home is a dismantled sofa bed, making access to most of the door's underside very tricky. This lid is cut from a piece of hardboard, so I added some bracing to it which also serves as a way of keeping it in the right place. It's from a piece of furniture, a small bookcase or something like that, and wasn't quite long enough, so I added a bit of card to one end and some lollipop sticks to the other end to cover gaps. To make sure this top bit of landscape doesn't stick to the bottom bit, I put a temporary plastic cover between them, which was also to protect the electronics from water and plaster later on. With that in place, I scrunched up packing paper that I've kept for this purpose and held it down with masking tape. I then covered the lot with plastic cloth. The plaster cloth would need several days to fully dry, so I turned my attention to the far corner of the railway. For the sake of getting some kind of improvement in place quickly, I decided to add a simple bit of rising land. I didn't fancy leaning over the railway to make all of that, so drew a template of the area to cover and transferred that to a piece of cardboard. I've had some blocks of Oasis foam for a long time and decided to try using them. It was very easy to carve and crush these to shape, but the blocks were relatively small, so I had to join several together. It's also very gritty. I didn't like how it felt to handle. To keep blocks held together, I pushed cocktail sticks into them. I did a few test fits and made refinements, then once happy with the shape I covered it in plaster cloth. Then it was time for Christmas, giving this lot about a week to dry before I came back to it. The corner bit of land didn't sit flat on the door, but it looks like packing something under it right in the far corner would make it look okay. I'm not convinced this bit of land is an improvement over having nothing in that corner. To me, it seems to direct the eye into focusing on how the railway turns back on itself, and makes the railway seem a bit narrower. I'm leaning towards hiding that corner of track in a tunnel, but that would take longer to do, so that's for the future. The middle mound wasn't very successful. I hadn't done anything to firmly attach the plaster and scrunched up paper to the hardboard, so it just floated a bit freely. Bits of paper also kept falling off because I hadn't glued them, and I hadn't got even a slightly neat join to the rest of the land at the edge of the plaster. Time for a different approach. I decided to go for some insulation foam. Each of these two boards was a bit less than £10 at B&Q, which makes it a lot cheaper than Oasis foam. I wasn't quite prepared for the amount of mess that comes from cutting these, or the horrible squeaking noise cutting it often makes. I tried with a few different cutting implements. The best for large-ish cutting was a small handsaw. I tried a foam cutting hot knife that I'd bought a couple of years ago but not yet used. It wasn't able to do the job. Its instructions do say it's not for use on dense foam. I soon learned to keep the vacuum cleaner to hand and not to wear a fleecy top when carving this foam. The little pieces have a static attraction that sticks them to lots of things, but so much so to my fleecy jumper that even the vacuum cleaner couldn't tidy me up. A lint roller did the trick, thankfully. It takes a long time to get the foam carved to just the right shape, and to do all of the necessary vacuuming afterwards, but it felt like I had the best control of the land shape from this approach. To help avoid damaging the edges of this mound in the future, I need to be able to get the lid into the right position fairly easily, so I added some scraps of wood to the inner frame to keep it from sliding along. I didn't film it, but I also chamfered the wood on the underside of the lid to help guide it into place. From a scrap of wood, I made a basic handle and a small hole in the foam for it, then stuck the foam to the hardboard with PVA glue. When I checked the next day, it seemed to be securely attached. The area with the handle will itself need a removable section of scenery over it eventually. I still needed to cover the hole at the end, and for that I decided to make another removable section, but this one would just stand on some legs of its own. I made that from hardboard, scraps of wood and scraps of insulation foam. In a similar way, I made a section to cover the exposed servo motor. I may need to make adjustments to the servo in the future, so this section needs to be removable. Having made sure the servo had plenty of room to move, I carved some foam to shape. It took a few attempts to get something of a similar shape to the surrounding land. This all got a reasonable structure for the land in place, but was rough, particularly around the edges, so I tried using some filler I happened to have. That didn't go so well. I don't know how long I've had it lying around since first opening it. I suspect it's been well over a year, and it wasn't really the right consistency. I rummaged a bit further and found some polyfiller. That was in much better condition. Once the biggest gaps were plugged with filler or chunks of foam, I covered the lid with plaster cloth, again using plastic to protect the components underneath and to stop it sticking to the sides of the hill. The plaster seems to take several days to fully dry, so I covered the other removable sections in plaster cloth away from their intended locations. Before Christmas, I'd expected that in a couple of weeks I could get as far as finishing some landforms and have at least painted them a base green. But it's been much slower going than I'd expected, and it's now been a while since I last published a video, so this is where I've decided to pause for now and switch to video production. I'm pleased with the insulation foam and plaster cloth though. Overall on this railway I've tried cardboard, wet shredded paper, steel mesh, aluminium mesh, scrunched up paper, different types of papier-mâché, and oasis foam in various combinations. For land that doesn't need to be completely hollow, insulation foam is now by far my preferred approach. Being able to easily control the shapes and quickly stick bits together strongly with PVA glue has made the process enjoyable for me. I feel much more in control of the outcome. However, the plaster cloth doesn't leave an ideal surface, and there are some relatively large gaps that still need filling to make a nice shape near joins in the land. In video number 25, nearly a year and a half ago, I tried making a basic sculptor mold alternative, which failed miserably, but I'm going to have another go with different ingredients. I've watched a few more YouTube videos about how other people have done it, and many months ago bought cheap toilet paper for this purpose. Since some T-gauge ballast experiments a while ago, I also have plenty of spare plaster of Paris. So far I've only shredded some toilet paper. I put it through my paper shredder, but most of it ends up wrapping around the chopping mechanism, and can stall the shredder. Putting it into reverse for a bit seems to free most of the paper, and I can pick the remaining pieces out with some tweezers. Overall, I think this will still be a lot less effort than manually ripping or cutting the paper. So, I've plugged some gaping holes in the middle mound and added a little scenic interest in the far corner. It's not staggering progress, but at least it's an improvement. I'm still keen to get further than this, but it sounds like the Dapol Super Voyagers will soon arrive. I first pre-ordered one with Hattons when they were announced more than 4 years ago, and I want the railway to be in an operational state when my Voyager arrives, so I can test the model straight away. See video number 36 if you want to know why I'm keen to test it soon after arrival. That's all for now. Bye bye.